Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Ben Spatz. I'm a reader in media and performance at University of Huddersfield. I'll make some introductory remarks before we get into the main part of tonight's event. I'll just start with a draft land acknowledgement that is still very much in process, but which I have been developing over the course of this event series. I would like to acknowledge that the England in which I live and work, as Frantz Fanon said of Europe, is a creation of colonial processes and owes its existence to ongoing exploitative relations around the world. The right of the peoples colonized by this country to participate fully in the determination of its future remains unceded. This is an event hosted by the Center for Experimental Practices at University of Huddersfield, which is a new research center, an interdisciplinary research center that's just in the process of being set up and finding out what it is. It's focused on experimental practices in a broad sense, but with a large focus on artistic research, practice research, embodied research, research creation, and all sorts of experimental methodologies that are at the borders of academia, pushing at the boundaries of what the university is and what we need it to be. I'd like to thank Kate and Colin, who are here. Colin is the center manager and Kate is the program manager, and we are working together hosting and organizing and curating this event series. And if you go to, I think I have it pasted here, I'll put it in the chat. Yep, that is the landing page for the center, and you will see that we are gradually putting together a calendar of events, some of which are organized by us and some of which we're co-hosting or other people have organized it, and we're also participating in it. But you can see some exciting events there and some growing content there. And if you keep an eye on that page, you will see what we are doing in the future. The Lines of Flight seminar series has been going under various guises since 2014, and it's always been an open public research seminar series looking at various forms of practice research and creative experimental methodologies, again, on the edges of what constitutes research and what constitutes knowledge production. Again, looking at what the university is, what it can be, what it's not, what we need it to be, how to push on those boundaries, how to work under that radar. This seminar series of this spring is called Black Methods, honoring what Catherine McKittrick and many others have foregrounded as Blackness beyond demographics, incorporating, of course, identity, but moving also into other ways of understanding what Blackness can mean, what it can be as a field of knowledge that is vital to many, many different contemporary conversations. And that's part of what we've wanted to host here, and underpinning this is very much my own sense of both the really, really exciting possibilities, but also the tremendous limitations and narrowness of artistic research and practice research as they've developed in Europe and in the UK, and wanting to think about where else in the university practice research in radical forms is already taking place, and how conversations between different areas that are all pushing in different ways against the form of the university might lead to additional leverage and additional ideas and additional power in that direction. In terms of just a little bit of housekeeping on the meeting, so the chat is very much open, and you're very welcome to put any comments or questions into the chat while the main presentation is going on. And then when that's done, we will take a short little break to just kind of process that first part, and then we'll come back for a discussion. And if you want to put something in the chat, then I'm happy to read out what's in the chat at that point, so that I can feed it in, and also noting that this is being recorded and we will be posting it later on the CXP website so that people who are not here right now can also benefit from it. So if there's something in the chat, I'll read it out so that it can be part of that recording. On the other hand, if you'd like to appear audiovisually or just audio or just visual and make an intervention or ask a question or a comment at that time during the discussion, you're also more than welcome to do that, and that would be really lovely. Without further ado, I will now introduce Cara Hagan, who is our guest today, and I'm so pleased to be inviting Cara here and learning from what she's going to present. We've been in touch for a good number of years now, and I've been following her work and inspired by her work, and there's, of course, too much to list to mention all of the different things. I want to read the first line from the bio on Cara's website, which is Cara Hagan is a mover, maker, writer, curator, champion of just communities, and a dreamer. very much known as a choreographer and a screen dance creator, as well as a screen dance curator. And Cara has written a book on screen dance called Screen Dance from Film to Festival, Celebration and Curatorial Practice, which is published by McFarland. She's also edited a book on practicing yoga as resistance, which is really, really interesting. And most recently is on the faculty of the New School in New York City and is program director of the MFA in Contemporary Theater Performance there. So I am, and does many other things, this book project, Ritual Activism, and we've talked in the past about other kinds of ritual intervention and activist intervention. And so very much working across media and very much outside the university, pushing against all of those formal boundaries and doing all sorts of extraordinary work. So I'm really excited to hear what you're going to present and then have a conversation about whatever that brings up for everyone who's here. So thank you so much for joining us. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I very much appreciate being invited, as always, and always being in orbit with you, Ben, is fabulous. So I was so excited about this today, and thinking about how excited I am to be able to have conversation with folks who aren't in my immediate vicinity. That's always a pleasure. And I'm joining you from the lands of the Lenape people on the island of Manhattan, and an ode to an unapologetically free and sacred booty. Here we go. So what I'll do is I'll read some excerpts from an essay that I've written, and then I'll show a couple of films, and then we'll have a chat. That's pretty much the run of show today. Ode to an unapologetically free and sacred booty. The title for this essay comes from a short art film I made in 2018, one of a series of films I made in an effort to liberate myself and my creative work from the systemic colonization of my artful body and mind, a practice that is necessarily employed at various intervals inside the creative life of a non-white femme artist scholar navigating the intricacies of privilege and oppression as they exist in 21st century Western society. A Minute of Your Time, Please is a collection of short digital self-portraits created between 2016 and 2019 that explore the site of my brown femme body as place. By the term place, I mean the physical parameters of my body, space, location, in parentheses, that is imbued with a chronicle of experience, or meaning, in parentheses. I hold that a space is a container and a place has meaning, and most every space is a place to someone, except in the case where placehood has been denied or revoked as an act of oppression or neglect. In this exploration of place, I reclaim and declare the site of my body and its contents as sacred and magical, while owning anger, sadness, and all the questions that come from being a human being in relationship to other human beings. These films were made in the midst of and in reaction to personal and societal struggles with structural injustice, coupled with the indescribable beauty of existing in an impermanent, imperfect, characteristically expressive vessel. Long after their making, in the time of COVID-19 and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement in public discourse, the films remain salient reflections whose nuances continue to reveal themselves. The systematic colonization of the moving body of color, broadly conceived as she, they, dances, organizes, travels, learns, and teaches in the world, compels me to create works outside of the structures of dominant culture. Outside of the proscenium, I also refer to this space as the great separator. Outside of prevailing production trends and values on display on screens, outside of the expectation of virtuosity within the movement communities from which I come, to escape the physical and psychological supremacy of my one and only body. These films, and more directly the experience of making these films, the very decision to make them at all, demonstrate the power of aesthetic activism and the role of asserting one's imagined and therefore extant liberation. In the discussion that follows, I buck the expectations of scholarship as it is construed through the supremacist structures of the academy and its inherent hierarchies. Can work that looks to the body as the primary resource of knowledge be considered scholarship at all? One wonders, but I'm not here to argue. Instead, I invite you, reader, to lean into the soft flesh of embodied intelligence, to feel the palpable possibility of liberation as it exists in the deep corners of our being. Before exploring the work of the films, though, it is necessary to provide some background for the experiences that have directly and indirectly led to their making. I'll begin with my introduction to movement work through the study of dance in my youth, followed by an explication of my entry into the academy, the mechanisms of supremacy there, and my simultaneous undertakings into movement work as experienced through the lens of community organizing and civic engagement. From these tributaries flow some of the essential substance of my creative understanding of the world and my reactions to it. Embodied beginnings. My body remembers rhythm. My father is a musician, a percussionist. When I was a child, my father practiced on his drum set in the basement directly below my bedroom. Often, I would lay on the floor in an effort to absorb the vibrations and sounds into my skin, my muscles, my organs, my bones. I would imagine big, fat sound waves penetrating my body in that order. I loved the way it felt. Growing up as a mixed-race Black girl in central New York in the 1990s, I was exceptionally lucky to spend my adolescent years dancing at a Black, woman-owned studio among a cohort of predominantly Black and brown students studying both African diasporic and Eurocentric dance styles. I had the good fortune to see bodies of color doing not only Afro-Caribbean, jazz, tap, Dunham, Horton, and other 20th century modern techniques, but I regularly experienced ballet on bodies of color before it was more common to see them on the professional stage, outside of those few companies like the Dance Theater of Harlem, whose mission it was and remains in part to, quote, present a ballet company of African American and other racially diverse artists who perform the most demanding repertoire at the highest level of quality. When I began studying at the Onondaga Dance Institute in Syracuse, New York, under the tutelage of Cheryl Wilkins Mitchell at the age of 13, I knew I wanted to study ballet. I had been exposed to ballet while in elementary school through performances of the Nutcracker brought to Syracuse by the Moscow Ballet. I was captivated by the twinkly music, lush costumes, and the long lines and symmetrical patterns being created by the bodies on stage. Because of the specialness of it all, the formal dress commonly seen in the audience, the size and scope of the sets and costumes on stage, the live orchestra playing classical music, the need of a ticket to enter the theater, the amount of space between the performers and the audience, the constant reminder that this ballet was a time-honored, quote, tradition, the sheer brightness, read whiteness of it all. This was, in my estimation, the pinnacle of dance practice and performance. As a result, I had taken a few ballet classes in the years prior to meeting Wilkins Mitchell at our local community center and had since been harboring dreams of becoming a professional dancer that I held close to my chest until I could no longer stop my zeal from bubbling over. I passionately declared to my mother one afternoon as she stood over the stove cooking, "I want to bring dance to the people." Soon after, I was taking weekly ballet classes at Onondaga Dance Institute, but was also introduced, among other things, to Afro-Caribbean dance. My very first performance with the Onondaga Dance Institute Dance Company was a swirling festival piece where, to my delight, I got to wear a large yellow and red skirt that I opened and closed to the rhythms of hand drums. I took my first ever modern dance classes in the techniques of Katherine Dunham and Lester Horton, where I learned about the legacies of these choreographers and their students, including Alvin Ailey. During my sophomore year of high school, we would take a trip into New York City to take classes at the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater with money raised by the studio's nonprofit organization, Parents Promoting Dance. Back at the studio, we would dance jazz and tap like I'd seen in the movie musicals of the golden age of Hollywood I loved so much. I remember learning and performing a jazz dance to Nina Simone's rendition of the song Mr. Bojangles, originally written in 1968 by singer-songwriter Jerry Jeff Walker. We talked about the lyrics of the song, and while not based on the Bojangles I'd come to know from the movies, famous tap dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson, the lyrics, "He danced for those at minstrel shows and county fairs. Throughout the South, he spoke of tears of 15 years, how his dog and him traveled about," gave us an opportunity to talk about the minstrel and vaudeville circuits of the late 19th and 20th centuries and the impact those circuits would have on the development of dance in the United States. Wilkins Mitchell and her small staff of teachers presented dance as a broad ecology of movement, the history and practice of which was both complicated and gorgeous. No technique was more important than another. They all supported each other in a well-rounded artistic experience in the task of advancing culture. My first in-depth experiences in dance were more of a disruption to the status quo in dance studios and programs of the 20th and early 21st century than I would realize until I stepped into the realm of conservatory training in preparation for a life in professional dance. Getting serious. My body remembers doubt. The first time my belly was pinched by a pair of calipers, I was told I needed to lose 5 to 10 pounds. This was standard practice in the conservatory world. I wondered how, as a slender teenager who didn't begin to menstruate until she was 16 years old because of a lack of body fat, I was going to rid myself of the wrong I didn't even realize I was supposed to loathe. One definition for the word colonization is, quote, the act of appropriating a place or domain for one's own use, end quote. When I reference the systemic colonization of the moving body of color, I mean the seizure or occupation of the expressive facets of one's body and mind through social conditioning and institutionally sanctioned practices for the benefit of white cultural narratives and aesthetic value systems. In practice, this looks like the silencing or omission of ideas, histories, and ways of doing from minority communities in favor of ones deemed more valuable and or comfortable by white culture. It looks like the training of young bodies and minds to hold ideas, histories, and ways of being in the world espoused by whiteness in higher regard than ideas, histories, and ways of being in the world originating from communities of color. It looks like instilling doubt and antipathy toward the physical self, lived experiences, and creative sensibilities born of Black and brown cultural narratives, traditions, and aesthetic values. These practices work to employ bodies and minds of color in preserving and advancing white culture while undermining their own lineages and knowledges. When I was 15 years old, I began to study away at summer intensives and found that the variety of styles I had participated in at my home studio were either not included in these pre-professional programs, or if they were included at all, given second billing to ballet and modern. When I asked teachers I met about why this was the case, I was essentially told that, quote, strong technique would allow me to do all styles with proficiency. At the time, I did not have enough knowledge or perspective to fully understand the subcontext of sentiments like that, but I wondered, would having the ability to pull up and turn out in my ballet classes serve me in getting down into the floor to execute many of the movements in Dunham technique I had learned if I wasn't also practicing Dunham technique with as much frequency? Would I lose my ability to feel rhythm in the same way if I wasn't hearing diasporic music like jazz, West African, and funk on a regular basis? Did aspiring to be a professional dancer include becoming savvy on which kinds of dance were taken more seriously than others? Would studying the wrong dance styles impact my chances of having a successful career? I thought it best to be proactive in getting the right kind of movement education. Ultimately, I ended up at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts for my senior year of high school and my undergraduate collegiate study. There, I was introduced to the rigors of full-time conservatory training and its inherent biases embedded in long histories of embodied hierarchies. I loved my training at UNCSA. I came to deeply appreciate postmodern dance and the pleasure of studying composition. I loved the slew of guest artists that challenged me technically and conceptually, and most importantly, through the unceasing assemblage of classes, conditioning, rehearsals, and projects, I confirmed for myself that not only did I love dancing, but that I was indeed following a righteous path by pursuing dance. Even so, I was struck by the lack of diversity among my peers in my classes, the lack of diversity among the regular faculty and administration, the exclusion of discussions of dancers, choreographers, and dance forms from African and other diasporas, and the assumptions and expectations placed on mine and my of-color classmates' bodies that would put us in our perceived abilities in boxes. I struggled to find common ground with some of my classmates whose obvious alignment, both physically and philosophically, with the curriculum of whitewashed aesthetics and sensibilities, meant that they more easily assimilated into the culture of the program and its aims than I did. Despite my enjoyment of the program, I grappled with perceptions that I was somehow not sufficiently cultured. I struggled with perceptions that my body was somehow insufficient too. In addition to my regular technique and conditioning classes, I worked out at the gym trying to shrink my buttocks and streamline my thighs to better fit the physical aesthetic perpetuated by the institution. I started a practice of earning the things I wanted to eat most, Mr. Workout, no ice cream. Didn't get that leg high enough up in ballet class yesterday afternoon. No hash browns at breakfast. I started listening to the same music my white classmates listened to. I studied the people, places, pieces, and philosophies they lauded, even though I realized that these contortions wouldn't necessarily make me more palatable to my classmates or my instructors. I assumed that putting forth a visible effort to embrace the prescribed ideologies of the space, both explicitly articulated and silently presumed, would help me in the long run. I'm going to skip over the part where I go into my entry into teaching. We can talk about that if you want. But I'm going to skip to organizing. Organizing in small town America. My body remembers bafflement. At a 2017 sister march to the Women's March in DC following the election of Trump, a Black woman speaks to the crowd about the effects of racism on communities. A white woman turns to me and hugs me. She says that she, quote, wants to be nicer to people of color, end quote. I do not know her name. She does not ask me my name. For me, movement exists in three realms. 1, ergonomic and expressive movements of the body that include pedestrian movement for living and work, dance, sport, movement for the sake of social interaction, and movements undertaken as ways of embodied knowing. 2, movement of the body through time-space, which includes frequently traveled pathways in and around one's home and local spaces, and movement across borders near and far for leisure, exploration, migration, or refuge. And 3, movements as they relate to struggle and coalition building in the socio-political realm. Outside of my institution, I am a community organizer whose movement work looks like holding space for discussion, learning, strategizing, and connection, marching, writing, and otherwise using spectacle as a socio-political device, and attempting to model what a consistent and committed civic practice looks like. As the fervor leading up to the 2016 election began to gain traction across the nation, I initiated a community group called Small and Mighty Acts, or SAMA for short. SAMA is a grassroots group meant to, quote, help people meet their civic potential, end quote. SAMA meets for monthly meetings that connect with actions, initiatives, and organizations that speak to their interests, talents, and capacity. For example, a representative from App Voices, a local nonprofit dedicated to environmental justice, may attend the meeting to relay information about an upcoming river cleanup. As a result, another person in attendance may offer an hour of their time to help pick up small pieces of litter. Another may offer a pickup truck for the day to transport larger items left around and in the river. Another person may offer to hang flyers about the event further out in the county where information about events in town may not always be passed on. It is my belief that sustained civic participation is dependent on citizens feeling like they are able to contribute in meaningful ways, and that if everyone is doing the part they are most equipped to play, our work as a collective can be better accomplished. Moreover, I believe that connecting with people who do different work than you can open doors to new learning, the acquisition of new skills, and the broadening of one's capacity for action. Thus, the philosophy and practice of SAMA is one of building relationships in pursuit of collective liberation. As one of only 2 Black women leading grassroots groups in my community, it can be challenging to balance perceptions with the realities of how the world works in order to keep the momentum of civic engagement going. In a space full of white, female, self-described social justice advocates at one such SAMA community gathering, one woman chimes in to say that she had never experienced such racism as when she was teaching on a Native American reservation. Some of the kids had called her names. Another chimes in to say that she grew up in a city where she was the minority and knew what it was like to experience racism because not all the Black kids in her neighborhood were nice to her. As the trappings of post-colonial decorum dictates, I didn't speak up to say that being called a name when you're white isn't the same as being called a name when you're a person of color. How being called a name means that you don't have the freedom to choose where or how you live, or how being called a name means that you don't always get to choose your friends. Weighing my options as the only woman of color in the room and how any comments I made might be weaponized against me, I remained silent about my own experiences and redirected our conversation so as not to disrupt the event. The state of forward motion and keeping morale intact often comes at the cost of deeper understanding of mechanisms of oppression in community organizing spaces where the demographics are skewed heavily in one direction. Soon after this incident, there was a rally being organized in the region for racial justice. I received texts asking if I would be in attendance. Uncharacteristically, I communicated that I would not be. I stayed at home and made a film instead. It was one of the most enjoyable days I'd had in what had been a slew of difficult ones. Filming reclamation. My body remembers the warmth of the sun on my shoulders. I'm filming Picnic, the very first of my filmic explorations for A Minute of Your Time, Please. It is June. It's getting hot outside. I'm holding a cardboard heart in front of my chest. I'm expressing my capacity for love, the possibility that love made visible may be a source of magic in the world. Black and brown bodies, so regularly controlled, censored, and scrutinized in society throughout history, require spaces where the reach of whiteness and colonial doctrine cannot impact us. Throughout history, Black and brown people have been resourceful in creating such places in the midst and in spite of oppressive circumstances as acts of resistance and as a matter of survival. In particular, the history of Black theatrical performance offers many examples of just how creative enterprise lends itself to the pursuit of liberation. When drums were outlawed on slave plantations in 1740, for example, along with the establishment of a handful of other punitive laws that regulated the movement of Black bodies in worship and celebration, movement across land, and the pursuit of intellectual agency, components of some of the United States' most quintessential art forms were nurtured: jazz music and tap dance. Further along in history, Black people have asserted their significance in the reclamation of diasporic practices while forging new cultural expressions through the likes of makers such as anthropologist, author, teacher, and dance artist Katherine Dunham, whose work penetrated even the widest spaces of ballet and Hollywood in the mid-20th century. For me, digital space has offered such a realm where I can mitigate the effects of whiteness on my body and mind in constructive ways. In digital space, the laws of time and physics are flexible. As long as I am working outside the structures of or in service to an institution or platform geared toward dominant sensibilities, I can create work that is my own expression of aesthetic freedom, my own act of resistance and mechanism for survival. A Minute of Your Time, Please began as an organic response to my need for a creative outlet to, as described in the introduction to this piece, explore the side of my brown femme body as place. As a colonized being, the body as an exploration and expression of place, a location ripe for the repatriation of the self, provides me with a platform to make art that is indeed commentary on the effects of systemic colonization on my body, but not what some people call oppression porn. Oppression porn is work that is made under the guise of providing sociocultural commentary, but instead puts suffering on display for the entertainment of the dominant gaze. In this collection of films, I instead put on display my capacity for whimsy, humor, absurdity, contemplative introspection, honoring my journey through trauma and joy. These are qualities not often attributed to bodies of color in expressive spaces and creative institutions. Funders and platforms often dictate that bodies of color fulfill the roles of long accepted tropes that do not leave room for more expanded definitions of Blackness. In my live stop motion film Picnic, for example, I appear and disappear into thin air as a game between myself and the sun moving across the sky over the course of the afternoon. I take time to enjoy my surroundings and interact with them with wonder. I reveal the magic of a world created from one's imagination. I myself am magic, but I'm not magical in service to any other character but myself. The trope of the magical Negro is absent in this exploration. In total, there are 10 films. They are all rather raw in their execution as I actively pursue conceptual content instead of production value in these pieces. Thus, these pieces are not festival films, but exist in alternative spaces like social media as part of invited talks and as part of art exhibitions. I'm going to skip over some parts and get to one more part of this essay. I'm not going to talk about them all because we're going to watch some of them. And that's more fun than hearing me talk about it. All right, let me get to this one part. About that booty. My body remembers. Embarrassment. I'm 16 years old. I'm at the bar in a ballet masterclass. The instructor, a middle-aged white man, comes over to me to give a verbal correction. After the accompanist stops playing at the end of the exercise, he says to me, "If you don't straighten up, I'm going to spank your buttsy." I attempt the movement in silence as he watches. He lightly smacks my butt cheek in front of the whole class. I try not to be too upset. It's not like he didn't tell me what was going to happen. I just didn't think he was serious. In her book, Pleasure Activism, Adrienne Marie Brown writes, pleasure activism asserts that we all need and deserve pleasure and that our social structures must reflect this. Pleasure activists seek to understand and learn from the politics and power dynamics inside of everything that makes us feel good. Ultimately, pleasure activism is us learning to make justice and liberation the most pleasurable experiences on this planet. Despite their obvious commentary and their origins in experiences of oppression, the most salient aspect of creating A Minute of Your Time, Please, is that all of the films in the collection have been made with and through joy. Joy in the business of systemic and interpersonal oppression is a state of being often compromised as a mechanism of control. By denying people the human experience of joy, oppression can chip away at the layers of the self, making bodies more susceptible to the effects of oppression. By enacting joy in the making of this collection, I'm resisting the control of my body and mind while employing a conscious and concerted practice of self-liberation. Of all the films in the series that express my capacity for liberation, Aspirant Pursuits would be the centerpiece of the collection. It is here where I explore my relationship to the white female body as a reference to my lived experiences with my own body in comparison to white female bodies in dance and other spaces, and as a rebuttal to the status quo in society more broadly. This exploration is quirky in every sense of the word, a satire on the socio-political importance of the white female body and its assumed beauty. A mannequin, Freya, maintains a static presence throughout the first half of the 4.5-minute piece as I move around her, size her up, confront her in one instance, and confide in her the next. The dance we do is one of moving in and out of conflict, much the way Black women and white women do in real life as society continues to uphold and reward tensions between women as a feature of the success of the patriarchy. Ode to an Unapologetically Free and Sacred Booty is the title of the epilogue of the piece, which is the same length as the first half of the piece, an intentional statement that what comes after the main commentary is not at all an afterthought, but a triumphant finale. In it, I spend 2 minutes in clear, unabashed celebration of my brown booty and liberation and joy. In a hot pink figure skating dress, I face away from the camera and twerk, the soft fabric of the skirt fluttering in the air as the flesh of my bum bounces and jiggles. Edited so that the entire twerk section is rendered in slow motion, one cannot miss each and every movement of the flesh. It is for this reason that I loved making and editing this section of the piece. I can watch the journey of my body and remember that I am human, with human flesh, muscle, and bone, all working in concert to express a few joyful moments that reverberate through the screen. I'm going to skip to the summation so we can watch the films. In the time of COVID-19 and societal unrest in the wake of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, I share many of the films again. They're seen in new contexts as people begin to connect the dots of how racism penetrates most every aspect of our social lives in America. Running and Running and Running, a film where for 1 minute I run in place on a pair of roller skates, in particular takes on new meaning as people connect the inability to move forward while running in place as a metaphor appropriate to invoke as we grapple with the unceasing murder of Black people. A treatise on generational trauma encapsulates the sentiments of so many Black people who understand Black death as a generational curse, coupled with the legacy of other forms of state-sanctioned violence on Black bodies, Black wallets, and Black psyches. As I reflect on the course of making and presenting these films, I'm confident in my belief that there exists spaces where our liberation is still intact, where we can live our dreams, question them, and forge new modes of existence. As a culminating act, I create one last film in November of 2019. Indwelling is just 1 minute long, and it is the softest, most vulnerable offering in the collection. In it, I lie across a carpet among an assortment of tiny houses, a neighborhood. Behind this neighborhood, my 8 months pregnant body acts as terrain. I am the mountains of the Appalachians. I am a holder of both pleasure and pain. I am a maker of life and magic. In this expression of my impending motherhood, I am free to revel in my body and the wonder that is the nurturing of a new generation. My body remembers giving birth. As I reach my hand between my legs to feel the hair on my daughter's head as she moves down my birth canal, I feel a simultaneous rush of exhilaration and pain. Physical pain, yes, but also the pain of the realization that once she leaves my body, I can no longer keep her safe. In those moments, I become immediately aware of my obligation to myself and to this tiny human to keep joy and wonder at the center of our lives. Our survival depends on it. All right, so I'll stop there. And I would love to show just 3 of the films, though they're short. And if there are any others that you would like to see that I mentioned and that we didn't see, we can always go back and look at them during the discussion. But I'll start with Aspirant Pursuits and Magically Ordinary. Yeah. And then we'll show Indwelling.
This is another Missy Elliott exclusive. Come on. It's all for the love, but there is more things that keep a man satisfied. Oh, come on. And I know the remedy just to cure him from cheating, even if he tried. Hey, Coochie, don't fail me now. I gotta turn this brother out, so he don't want nobody else but me and only me. Coochie, don't fail me now. I gotta turn this brother out, so he don't want nobody else but me and only me. I know he's a man, and men have intentions to sleep with someone else. But that's why when I make love to him, I'm ruling. Try to give him my best. Hey, Coochie, don't fail me now. I gotta turn this brother out, so he don't want nobody else. Me and only me. Coochie, don't fail me now. I gotta turn this brother out, so he don't want nobody else but me and only me. As long as the coochie good, it's alright. Ain't gotta worry about my man, 'cause he knows mine is one of a kind, and that's why he keeps staying. The coochie good, it's
about dreams.
gotta worry about my man, 'cause he knows mine is one of a kind, and that's why he keeps staying.
Look, Ma, yeah, you got that bomb and what that prissy stuff. Glad it ain't that gushy stuff.
That cushy stuff.
I don't like the mushy butts. I wish we was like Buffy over Jennifer. Him and her, so much like I and we.
And what that mean?
We just love the booty. All we see in 3D is.
I love my morning trot. It's the way I center myself for the day. But lately, it hasn't been as fun as I'd like because someone, somewhere, started a rumor that me and horses like me are magic. So I have to be careful because folks follow me through the forest, hoping to witness a miracle or hoping that I'm going to pull a rabbit out of a hat I'm not even wearing. I mean, it sounds harmless enough, but I've had some pretty close calls and I've had to make some quick decisions to get out of harm's way. I mean, have you ever seen a horse try to climb a tree? Anywho, the fact of the matter is, the horn, the iridescent fur, the whole nine is just the result of a few recessive genes. I mean, don't get me wrong. The coolest thing about being a horse with my particular genetic makeup is that my hooves don't get dirty. Like, they're literally shit resistant. Being labeled by others as being magic means that the world has expectations of you, and if you don't fulfill those expectations, people are disappointed. For example, there's a pretty common stereotype that horses like me are really good dancers. And you wouldn't believe how many people run after me just to ask me to dance for them, and how sad, angry, even violent folks become when I don't oblige. So, I'll say this. I do love to dance, but I don't do it for anyone's entertainment but my own. Dancing helps me clear my head and forget about being mislabeled, misunderstood, and misrepresented by others. After all, I'm just a horse, like every other horse out there. And just because your hooves are shiny doesn't mean you didn't step in it.
And if we'll switch over to the other video, to indwelling. Cool. So, like I said, if there's anything else that we want to see, we can do it during discussion, but I think now is the bio break time.
Yeah, I'd love to take like maybe 5 minutes. So if we come back at about 10 of, and then we can let all this settle, and feel free to still put things in the chat, and then we'll come back and have a conversation.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. If you want to come back in, add me here to this. Thank you so much for this presentation. So much to talk about, but I will start with questions. So I wanted to ask you, I guess, about this, when you mentioned about the digital as a space that you're working with and finding resource in, and that's really close to my heart. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, just kind of in general, to talk about your way of thinking about and working with the digital. But what I really wanted to kind of specifically ask about was to think about that in relation to collaboration, because I know that you like work, and we were also going to mention pedagogy. Like, I know that you work in a dance context and you choreograph ensembles and teach ensembles. And of course, you're leading an MFA in theater. And so, you're also very much coming from a collaborative ensemble creation background, right, in these other forms. But I know that also these video works and some of the others I've seen are very much solo. And I certainly resonate with that because what I find is that in doing this kind of very personal and also political video research, it can be quite difficult or quite delicate to work with other people's audiovisual bodies, because what you're exploring is, the presence of your own audiovisual body and that kind of way of working with your own audiovisual body where you can really push those limits and play with those, those pressures that are on the audiovisual body and see what's possible. And so I'm wondering if that's kind of, if that's how what leads you to solo work in those contexts, and how you think about, or if you have worked or are moving towards modes of collaboration that are all, how does that intersect with the digital space and the audiovisual creation?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, digital space is a comfortable space for me to work in, and a space where I feel like I can be vulnerable, but also in ways that I can do that in a playful way. I mentioned in the essay that I have power over time in physics. I really, truly believe that. But I think the decision to do something solo in digital space, because of course I make other types of films that are incredibly collaborative. And I didn't mention this in the essay, and I kind of want to go back and edit it and put it in there, because every time I read it, I go, that's missing. But the tradition of Black self-portraiture. There's a picture by Betty Saar called Mystic Sky and Self-Portrait. It's from like 1990 something. And she's in the corner of the picture. I don't know if you can pull it up. And there's it's this whimsical sky, right? And this idea that Betty and other artists, specifically Black artists who do self-portraiture, are doing so in a way that they're reclaiming pieces and parts of themselves that society has in the visual and oral space tried to alter or take away, and creating positive and other images for other Black folks to look at. I don't know if you found it, but I can pull it up and maybe share my screen.
I put it in the chat, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So obviously she's not the only one who has done self-portraiture, but I think that it's not so much about digital space as it is about the act of self-portraiture, in that I don't draw realistically. All of my drawings are like cartoons. I do draw and I do make things visually, but for me to be able to do a self-portrait in the way that other artists that I know would, I would naturally turn to digital space. But the other thing about digital space is that, at least in theory, it's an accessible space. We know that that's not entirely true. We know that there are hierarchies in digital space and access issues in digital space and all that. But being a person that I am, having the privileges that I have, it seems like an accessible space to me, if that makes sense. It's accessible to me. It's accessible to other folks that I interact with in my daily life. And it's a space whose language feels like home, just because of how I've grown up and when I've grown up and where I've grown up. Do you know what I mean? And always being a lover of film, of the screen since day one. I've always loved movies. And these are our screens, right? I think that had I been born in 1940 something, I probably still would have been a filmmaker, but you would have been asking me the same questions about silver nitrate film instead of digital space.
Can you actually tell us a little bit about some of your Screendance curatorial work? Because I saw one of the festivals that you curated. I think it was during the period of a lot of things being locked down, and it was extraordinary. So yeah, I know you also do a lot of that curation work, and that also speaks to that kind of digital space.
Yeah, so I started curating specifically Screendance work when I was in grad school. So Movies by Movers, which is the film festival that I founded back in 2010, which is still in existence, but I've since handed the reins over to somebody else this past season because I did it for 13 years. Started as a graduate school practicum. I'd been making short works for film. I'd been sending them to festivals, and I wanted to know about the other side of the table. I wanted to know about the process of selecting films and programming films together in conversation with and or in juxtaposition to each other, and what that whole world was, because it felt really foreign to me as somebody who had previously grown up in concert dance. I mean, that's what I was trained in first. And of course, because everything is so incredibly siloed in Western education, it's like I really had to fight to do all the things that I wanted to do. So even though I had been actually making movies since I was in about 7th grade, I didn't actually start to claim the moniker of filmmaker and film curator until much later in my life. So Movies by Movers, that has been happening since 2010. It merged with American Dance Festival in 2016, so it became ADF's Movies by Movers. And because of that particular project, because of that platform, I've spent a good portion of my life watching literally thousands of short art films, most of which have been in the vein of screen dance. But there are, of course, overlaps in experimental film. So you get things that are video art, things that would be more found footage, experimental documentary, all those kinds of things. So I've been steeped in it for a long time. And understanding film from I guess, I don't want to say industrial standpoint, because I'm not really part of the industry per se. I guess more of a traditional standpoint, where people have defined roles. There's a director, there's a producer, there's somebody who's doing the cinematography, there are gaffers, there are assistants and all these other, and writers and blah, 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 where everybody has a specific role to play, where in the experimental realm, of course, we know that that often is not exactly the case. People wear many hats, people slide into different positions and jobs as they're needed, and hierarchies exist in a different way in a lot of experimental film processes. So essentially what I've been able to do through my curatorial practice is use that as a research platform for me to know more about the landscape as it exists right now, by meeting the artists and their work again and again and again, but also to get a better handle on how we got to where we got to, as it forced me to really learn the history and know where things are coming from, and where influences are, and what the quote canon consists of, and the ways in which the canon needs to be disrupted. So. And I guess I should say I'm still curating, but on a freelance basis now.
Yeah, I mean, I have more questions, but I want to open up also if others have questions. Yeah, Kate.
Hi, Cara. I'm just curious. I'm also a femme-identifying practice researcher, and I'm curious how femme identity shapes your practice, how much it's amplified, like in terms of becoming a technique, or how do you use it as a technique? How does it inform your work? Whatever you'd like to speak to regarding that would be really great.
Yeah, so obviously growing up in dance, there was a lot about this that I didn't have a choice in. In that, especially when you're training in a conservatory type of environment, everybody's like, hello, girl, put on this girly leotard and these girly tights and move in this girly way. And I remember at an audition, I didn't have any point shoes because I had stopped doing point by then. Sometimes the North Carolina School of the Arts has companies come through to audition people. And so I did the men's combination across the floor and, hung with the guys. But like, it was such a weird thing at that time, because that was still like 2005. So like a million years ago, it feels like now. But unfortunately, it feels like dance is in many ways still stuck there, even though there's been a lot of conversation about kind of moving away from these gender binaries, by recognizing folks who are trans dancers, for example, by queering partner work, all these things. But it's certainly not happening in all spaces, and it's not happening in all spaces in the same way, and it's not always happening in spaces where people are actually looking at these things through a critical lens. And so by I don't know, how should I say this? Because I've been conditioned as a femme person, and even though I don't always feel that way, I use both she and they pronouns, there is some part of me that wants to be able to tip my hat to that, both in honor and in spite of. And especially, I think some of this has really come up for me since I became a parent. When I was visibly pregnant, there was a lot of comments and things that I got that just blew me away as to how people saw me as a woman in the world that I had never been aware of before that time. And since giving birth, having, you know, a kid out in the world and visibly being somebody who could be called mother, there's a whole other set of, I guess, rules there that also I may, in one instance, be playing along with, in another instance, not be playing along with. I mean, I definitely feel the pressure of being scrutinized by society as a mother, specific, like, quote unquote mother, and what that means, not to me, because nobody's actually asked me what it means to me. But what it means to be, quote, good at that or bad at that, or, you know, all those kinds of things. So I think there is a part of me, even though I don't always identify as being female and or woman, that wants to bow to the little girl in me, always, because she still exists. We went through a lot together and we're still here. And yeah, so I think that there's, and because also there is such a rich lineage of women and femme-identifying folks in performing arts, in feminist spaces. I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, the Kampahi River Collective. I'm thinking of Audre Lorde, of course. I'm thinking of Catherine Dunham. I mean, all these people who have just done this amazing work, to not acknowledge the feminine parts of me would be a disservice to who I am. So I don't know that I think it's a tool so much as it is a foundation of sorts, one of many foundations. Because there's also, and I write about this in the essay a little bit, about that agender part of me that when I'm in the art making process, I actually don't feel like either gender. I'm just a being, right? That doesn't actually adhere to ideas and or experiences of being woman or being man or being something in between on the spectrum, but something that is actually devoid of all of those things, just the creative mind. But in the same breath, I mean, there's also you can ask me the same question about being Black, right? Like, I don't get to not be Black. And so as much as some people might see that as a tool, it too is a foundation. Again, one of many foundations. Hope that wasn't too rambly. I hope I answered your question.
So thank you so much for that. That is really, really, really insightful and helpful. Thank you so much, Cara.
Yeah.
There's some other questions or comments or that people would like to say. I would love to hear more about, I mean, thinking about just some of what you were just saying, how you work with that. I suppose there's kind of two parts to this question. Maybe it's two separate questions, but they're also connected, which is teaching and then the university, because of course the university is much more than just teaching, but it's, you know, there is this kind of core job that we have of teaching. And I am interested in how you work with all of these kinds of identities, and also thinking about your video work also with like body type, which is so, you know, that's so central to what you're talking about, body type and body shape in relation to dance and theater. I mean, less strictly than dance, but still. And how you work with that pedagogically would be really interesting. But then also just, I'm always wanting to know how people feel about or navigate or strategize in relation to the university as an institution, like what's possible there and what's not possible and how.
Oh, Ben. Okay, so let me work backwards. Excuse me. The institution. I've been in the institution as a pedagogue for about 15 years, And in that time, I have learned a lot of stuff that I actually wish that I never knew, but I know it now. It's kind of like the man behind the green curtain. You can never unknow things that you know. At any rate, when I first entered the academy, I had this really romantic idea about it. Like, oh, people are thinking about things, and it's like you could do a million things, but you pick something and you love it so much that you just want to know everything about it. It was really naive. And I still actually, to some degree, feel that way, right? Like there's still part of me that's like the nerd that's like, oh, this is so great. I'm going to go to the library and think about stuff. And it's going to be so awesome. And sometimes it really is that awesome, but other times it's not. But then there's also the part of me that got hip really quick to the idea that, not just the idea, the reality that the institution doesn't give a shit about you. And that if you're going to exist in an institution, you need to understand that it's both give and take, that there's the part of you that wants to give. Like we get so emotionally invested in the success of our students, in the success of our programs, in the initiatives that we cultivate. And that feels like good work. But in that giving, because it is so much giving, right? You also have to remember that there's a lot in the institution for you to take. So any money that's on the table, I take it. Any grants that are available, I take them. Any trips that somebody's going to pay for, I take them. You know what I mean? Like I try to balance my generosity with what the institution can offer, knowing that the institution as an entity doesn't care about my generosity, and that I really appreciate theirs, though it's not generosity, it's just stuff that exists for me to use if I want to use it, and use it I do. So that's one thing. Teaching. I really enjoy teaching. Now, I would not have seen myself as a teacher if you asked me in undergrad if I was going to grow up and be a teacher. I would have told you were crazy. I was going to be on the stage. And of course, I have done that. But teaching has been this really beautiful space in that I realized that even though I am an introvert, that I really like people, which is paradoxical. An introvert who likes people, yes, they do exist. So being in the academy has given me space to be with people in really specific ways, where it's not just about me going, hi, I know these things and you need to know them, but more of a facilitation, much the way that I facilitate in community organizing spaces. I'm never the end all be all. It's a collaborative process. Pedagogy for me is highly collaborative. And it's not all about me. It's about the content that we're exploring and the people who are in the room. So it certainly also isn't a one size fits all. I mean, I've never taught a class the same way twice and intend never to do so. And it's a really wonderful way for me to hopefully be of service to some folks who are deciding what kind of citizens they want to be in the world, whatever that means to them, right? And if I can offer anything at all, hopefully it's something, even if it's something that they know that they don't want to do, or a way of being or acting in the world that they don't want to do that, that's also valuable information. So in terms of being an instructor, I always say that my classes are a series of suggestions, and I thank you for playing in my sandbox, and you do you. And that doesn't mean that there's no rigor. There's lots of rigor. I'm a fan of rigor. So this is a very rigorous sandbox that we're in, but I definitely am not in a space where I want to stand up in front of the room and just tell people things. One thing I hate doing is talking to myself, and I tell them that often. And yeah, what was the other question?
Well, about teaching, I mean, I was thinking about how you, I mean, in terms of pedagogical, like talking shop, I was asking about how you work with different aspects of identity and particularly body type. And I guess part of that was also because you've made this transition into a theater context. And I have also moved between theater and dance, and I'm interested in how you, how that's been. Of course, it's specific to specific contexts, but just thinking about these kind of things, whether it's race or gender or body shape, they function differently in theater and dance contexts. And I'm quite interested in your thoughts on that.
One thing that I tell my students a lot is that no teacher can reveal all the nuances about your body and the way it works to you. And that also means the emotional part of your body. instructors can only give you some tools to explore that more deeply, but the exploration has to happen through you, right? Instructors are only conduit. And so in that way, even when I'm teaching technique, which I don't do very much anymore because I don't enjoy it as much as I enjoy other types of classes, it's about, not about if it looks right or if you're the right body or you're thinking the right way or whatever it is. It's about feeling into the work, right? Touching your work every day in an honest way, whatever that means to you. Yeah, I mean, I guess for different classes, it happens in different ways. For example, if I'm teaching a class that's all about devising, for example, I mean, obviously that's highly collaborative. It's material that's coming from the group and the group dynamic, and that everybody, in essence, has to find a way to belong and or fit in to that context of whatever it is that is being made, but making it very clear that everyone has a role to play and that everyone has something important to contribute, and that we have to make space to hear and see all that is possible before we make decisions about what gets used and what doesn't get used in the creation of a devised work, for example. In classes, like if I'm teaching a modern dance class, for example, yeah, there are forms and there are things that I'll look to just to give shape, but remembering that the feeling and the experience of any given shape is going to be so vastly different from body to body that it makes it really hard for me to make blanket statements about what a shape should feel like and how it should inhabit a body, right? And so then it becomes a series of questions. Well, if you want to do this with your body, how does it feel when you attempt to do so? And if that feels like it's not working, where can you feel in your body to have it happen in a different way? And so in that way, I never get around to talking about things like the actual shape of one's body. I never get around to talking about things like whether or not somebody is the right weight or not. I know that dance is moving away from that, but not everywhere, that's for sure. And in terms of things like race and gender and all those things, you bring those into the room with you, right? And so they aren't necessarily things that you can leave outside the door, because they come with baggage, for lack of a better term, and not necessarily just the baggage that's like, oh, I've been through trauma and I have baggage, but just societal stuff that you pick up. You always have a backpack on at all times. And different people's backpacks have different things in them. And so I like to try and acknowledge folks' backpacks and what might be in them as they show me what's in them, right? Like you have to let people tell you who they are.
It's lovely. BA Tremblay comments, the stage and the teaching lectern are good places for introverts, which I very much resonate with. I think we have another hand up. Regina Mosh, would you like to put on your mic or camera? Hello.
Yes, coming up. Hello. Sorry, my computer is a bit slow, but can you hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I was curious if you have found that your creative practice, like your movement practice, or in what way also it can be soothing, but also how the research that you do can be potentially soothing to you or to, people you work with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that anytime we're in an embodied practice, we can use that in a way that is soothing. So I think the consistency of practice is soothing to me, knowing that I have an intention to be in the work in some way, shape, or form each and every day. And I think research works the same way for me. I think there are obviously those times in both research and in creation where it's like explosion of epiphanies and joy, right? And it's like it feels big and fabulous and wonderful, but there's also something to be said for the kind of measured marching forward in a process where it's like, okay, this is my handle and I'm going to hang on to it until I see this thing through. And that to me is really soothing. And I think as far as students are concerned, I try to, I guess not push, but illuminate the ways that, for me, because I can only speak from my experience, these things of consistency and always coming to the practice, even if you don't quite feel like coming to the practice, knowing that you can come to the practice in different ways on different days, that can be a source of steadiness, right? And soothing, in not just in one's art life, but in one's life generally. So.
Very cool. Thank you.
I wanted to just ask, like, what you're working on now or into the future. Of course, not that you have to give away any trade secrets, but like, I'm just interested in what's on the horizon.
Things going. I have some solo stuff happening and some group stuff. So I started working on a solo called Mama Piranha last year, and that actually started as a series of visual pieces that were either watercolor or tea stain. And the tea stains came from cups of tea that I didn't get to finish. Last year, I was living in Ohio with my daughter, apart from my partner. And so I was single parenting for a year. And as you might imagine, it's those of you who do it, it's a logistical nightmare, right? Trying to work full time and meet the needs of a child and. And so I started making these pieces where if I had a moment that I could call my own, I'd do one in color. And if I was rushing and found that there were cups of tea on the counter at the end of the day, I would pour them on a piece of watercolor paper and leave them to dry. And so I have this collection of like bombastic color and brown tea stains. And they kind of exist to demonstrate the spectrum of experience between time that is not your own and time that is stolen, and the idea that this inner life that you have is ever present and ever dynamic, even if the pressures of the outside world are, bearing down on you like they do. And so I had started improvising with those last year, but hadn't gotten to a place where I had felt like I was really in a space to perform anything at that point. So I got a residency at Galim in Brooklyn just this past month in May, and I created about 10 minutes of choreography, and I've performed that a couple of times, and I'm going to keep working on it. So that's happening. There's also a bunch of sound design that I've been working on in conjunction with that, and that I've been recording dreams that I've had, and I've been making sound scores and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely a multifaceted project, and I've created some larger visual pieces since creating those smaller visual pieces. So hoping to create some more of those larger visual pieces coming up. So that's one thing. I've been working on a lot of body percussion and repertoire that is influenced by buck and clog dance and other tap adjacent forms. I've been in residence at the American Tap Dance Foundation for this past year, and I'm going to continue as an artist in residence there this coming year. And we'll perform a little bit of that in July. When I originally came to the ATDF, it was because I wanted to make a film, which I'm raising money for. But this is one of those large cast, highly collaborative films that is called Cut Me Some of That Noise, and it will feature Deborah Mitchell of the New Jersey Tap Ensemble as the matriarch of this film, where basically she sets the tone for a new day with the rhythm of her heartbeat, and everything goes from there. And I've put in grants for a bunch of stuff that I don't know if it's going to happen yet, because I don't know if I have money. But, working on that. And then my book project that I'm working on right now, my scholarship, is called Dancing for Laughs, Signifying Bodies in the American Sitcom. And it's about Black dance in sitcoms from 1950 to 2005. And it looks at all the ways that actors and dancers in sitcoms both reify and subvert minstrel tropes through their bodies and the storylines that accompany those. And that's been really super duper fun. So, yeah.
Wow. That is so much to be doing at the same time. Thank you for coming. And just at the last moment, someone is putting in another question. I will read it out loud. Lisa says, you've talked about community organizing, about activism and pleasure activism specifically. What do you think are the crossovers with and differences between community organizing and activism, or community organizers and activists? So yeah, relationship between community organizing and activism and pleasure activism. I guess maybe it's a kind of a question about scale also. Is that what it's getting at?
Question of scale, and I think that organizing and activism, obviously, they could be thought of as one and the same, depending on who you ask, right? Where community organizers often identify as activists, but not all community organizers necessarily identify as activists, in that people could be organizing folks, but not actually going out and doing the action. Do you know what I mean? And so I guess that's where I would draw the line, where somebody who's organizing, facilitating is not necessarily going out and doing the marching or knocking on doors or staging, protests or spectacles or anything like that. But I think that for activism to be effective, there does have to be something about it that draws people to keep doing it, right? We can't function on anger alone. That is really hard and really hurtful. And when we are addressing things that are hurting us, we have to bring joy into the process. That's just my belief. Even when we're dealing with really heavy things, if we really want to do ourselves service as people who are seeking justice and seeking justice for other people, if we want to do service to other people, we can't. Anger only gets us so far, right? Anger is a really good catalyst. It's great. Like we can use it, right? No emotion that we have is invalid or bad, right? Rage gets us to a place where we're actually ready to get up off our butts and do something. But when we're in community together and we're staging these actions, if we're angry all the time, it's totally unsustainable. So there has to be times when we're in our gatherings where we're laughing together, where we're creating, banners with lots of colors and painting together, where, we might be writing letters or crafting statements, but there's also somebody brings chips, right? Like that has to happen. So it's about holding both at the same time, and recognizing that as human beings, we're allowed to feel more than one thing at once. We can hold pleasure and pain in the same container, and we ought to.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you for this whole presentation and for this whole conversation. Thanks also to everyone who came and joined us and participated and listened and asked questions. We have one more event coming up in this Lines of Flight series, Aisha Densmore Bay, next week, and then this little series will end, but we have lots of other events coming up, and hopefully we'll be planning similar series of events in the future. So thank you again, Cara, for coming. It's been lovely to have you. And thanks everyone. Have a great day or night.